Welcome back.
I'm Gorilla.
And I'm Dax, and we have a new topic for you today. We hope to bring you at least twice as many videos in 2018 as we did in 2017. Our topic today is the aquatic ape hypothesis. Gorilla, you do the honors.
Aquatic ape theory, which was popularized in the 1970s by Elaine Morgan with The Descent of Woman, which came out in 1972, and was repopularized more recently by
Sir David Attenborough.
in the 2010 era.
Yeah, I think the most recent topic on this that he did was a radio interview for BBC4 in September of 2016.
The theory was originally created by Sir Alister Hardy in 1960, who was a marine biologist.
Although there was a paleontologist called Max Westenhofer who did beat him to it and formulated the theory to a lesser extent earlier on.
Well, Sir Alister Hardy came up with the idea after reading the naturalist Frederic-Wood-Jones, who noticed the difference in skin. He didn't come up with the theory of the aquatic ape human skin.
It wasn't really brought into the popular attention until Elaine Morgan's book. But before we go into the history of all of this, perhaps you should enlighten everybody as to the synopsis of what this theory really entails, or hypothesis rather, as it is still relatively controversial and not widely accepted.
Well, that simple hypothesis is that in early man's history, humans were semi-aquatic. Not they would live on the land, but they would also fish and hunt in lakes, rivers, and the sea primarily.
What we're here to do today is to discuss the arguments in favor and against that idea to see if the aquatic ape hypothesis as a concept of early human evolution is a good contender against the idea, which is mostly mainstream right now, that early human development happened on the savannas of Africa.
Yeah, well, I do have an interesting one, which is from, I might get this wrong, but Philip Tobias, who was a paleoanthropologist in South Africa, who, towards the end of his days of study of man, said that savanna theory was essentially dead. So there is definitely a void somewhere, like in that period of history for human evolution. And the aquatic ape theory sort of fits, but it could be something else as well.
Well, what year was that he proposed that?
Well, he didn't propose the savanna theory. The savanna theory is far older, but yeah, he was a paleoanthropologist right up. I think he died in 2000 something. But yeah.
Well, you say he declared the savanna hypothesis dead, but I think it's mostly still accepted in the mainstream. I mean, obviously you have to go over all the evidence in favor and against and see which of the proposed ideas is the strongest, but it was certainly what I was taught in school, and it really does seem to still be the contemporary idea of how humans developed from earlier primates to Homo sapiens sapiens, which we are today.
Yeah, an interesting footnote for Philip Tobias. This isn't particularly related to the aquatic ape, but despite being an evolutionary scientist, he was an anti-apartheid factor, so he wasn't from the old mindset that the races were somehow linked to evolution, which they're not.
That's not necessarily even that strange of a footnote. I mean, depending on what year you're talking about, I don't think that there's general acceptance that there are major biological differences which justify racism or anything of that kind. Or was he like one of the earlier adopters when that was still more controversial?
He was one of the earlier adopters, and he was a philanthropist, and he was alive during the apartheid, but he was part of the anti-apartheid movement, despite being a white person.
So basically one of the earlier scientific opponents of the apartheid movement, really putting some factual basis behind counter-racism movements.
Yes, anyway, I digress. Let's get back to the theory.
Yes, we do digress. We'll probably edit this out anyway. Anyway, the aquatic ape hypothesis. There are many arguments for and against, and ideas which other competing ideas don't necessarily address as well, which do have some interesting ideas behind it and some logical reasoning for why there are a valid explanation of why humans evolving near bodies of water rather than on the savannas is at least an idea worth considering. Did you have any particular ideas you think stand out or that you favor?
I'm actually quite interested to hear your proponents to any of the ideas of the aquatic ape theory.
What do you mean people?
No, but what ideas do you think are falsehoods in the aquatic ape theory, such as hair loss and that kind of thing?
For example, one of the ideas I found while researching the topic was that one of the ideas for why the aquatic ape hypothesis is particularly valid is bipedalism, or rather simply said, why humans walk on two legs rather than on all fours. And some observations were made that other primate communities of great apes who live near water occasionally wade into the water for various reasons. I mean, seeking food is obvious, probable explanation, but there's other reasons as well. Either way, they wade, and they do so on two legs rather than walking on all fours like they do in other areas of life. And the proposed idea is that humans became bipedal by wading into water because they are aquatic apes and because they are more water-based in the earlier stages of our development. But when looking further into that, I found that a lot of the other ideas in favor of the aquatic ape hypothesis, such as certain foods and certain nutrients that are found in sea-based foods like fish and shellfish, would be critical for the development of our brain, like iodine and omega-3 fatty acids. But then when you look at the dates for bipedalism and brain development, you see a major shift. I mean, the earlier versions of humans, Homo erectus, Australopithecus, who really started becoming bipedal, fossil evidence shows that really started happening millions of years ago. But the major changes in brain capacity, which enabled us to become as intelligent as we are today, and the nutrients which were required for that change didn't appear until about 200,000 years ago. So two arguments given in favor of the aquatic ape hypothesis vary widely in their dating of when they would have influenced our development.
Oh, I did actually look at Homo erectus, and for a posthumous, like a similar evolution, because Homo erectus did have a relatively large brain compared to other apes of its time, which predates humans and existed all the way up to human evolution. And the majority of their finds, like their fossilized remains, have been found near coastal areas or inland where there would have been lakes or rivers. But also remnants of shellfish and other seafoods in their fossilized remains.
As in mineral deposits from the nutrients they ingested, or you're talking like they swallowed they swallowed clams, including the shells?
No, but there's certain seafoods like, well, they did also find the mineral ones. The mineral ones are far more common, which you can find in their bones. And yeah, they have found the remnants of seafood and shellfish around burial sites.
Well, then you're basically saying that you see in fossilized remains of earlier humans like Homo erectus, you see nutrients which affect their development in their bones and in their fossilized remains that suggest that they had seafood as part of their diet. But it could have come from other sources, of course, as well. You're talking several million years ago, so you're proposing, as part of the aquatic ape hypothesis, that it started that early on in our development.
Yeah, I am. I would say if the hypothesis is correct, then Homo erectus must have gone the same way.
Well, I don't know if there's really a consensus between proponents of the idea that at what particular stage it really started to have an impact on our development.
If you think of it as the expansion of the prefrontal cortex, which would line up, Homo erectus would be in that margin as well.
Well, I have to disagree with you there. The most rapid changes in human brain capacity occurred between, as far as I know, 200,000 years ago and about 50,000 years ago, when we really start to see major differences in brain capacity and skull size, which enabled us to become more intelligent, utilize tools at a greater level, and really start to take the first steps towards enabling our social structures into eventually becoming societies. And as far as I know, most of the fossils which support those datings were found in the Rift Valley in Ethiopia. Those major developments which really made us who we are today, yeah, they happened a lot more recently, and I don't necessarily think that seafood would be that big of an impact on it. I haven't found any evidence which suggests, based on the fossil record, that you would find that. I mean, some scientists argue that you would need some nutrients for that rapid acceleration in brain development, such as iodine or omega-3 acids, but I haven't really found fossil evidence or anything of the sort that suggests that they found those kinds of nutrients in great numbers at those stages of our development.
Yeah, but with the lack of iodine in human beings causes a very unaptly named disease called cretinism.
I found that as well.
Yeah, which is deficiency of the thyroid causes dwarfism as well.
Yes, I found that, but for the intake of iodine, you would find iodine in smaller numbers in other areas of life, and you wouldn't necessarily have to venture out to the shore and eat seafood to get an intake of it.
Well, iodine is commonly found in sea salt, and through a lot of human history, where people were paid in salt, and many cultures still used to use salt as currency for a good reason.
I'm not denying that sea-based foods contain high levels of iodine. A major intake of it in today's society is iodized salt, which you can just add to your food. But it can have chemical reactions, at least trace amounts, present in rainwater.
That's an interesting idea. I completely agree with you that the omega-3s you can be found readily in most land-based diets, especially ancient ones.
Well, as for the omega-3 or most other nutrients that would be attributed to a seafood-based diet, yeah, most of the alternative ideas to the aquatic ape hypothesis really accommodate the human change in diet towards omnivores from just, basically stealing those nutrients from other animals which do have them as part of their diet. I mean, there's plenty of plants we can't digest, at least anymore, but the nutrients from those plants that we do get into our diet because we eat animals which can digest them and take the nutrients out of them. And I haven't really found any compelling information that suggests that that couldn't be the same for the nutrients that are generally attributed to a seafood-rich diet.
There are other arguments in favor.
Yeah, there are quite a few. Hairlessness of humans and our relatively high body fat percentage, particularly in women, compared to other great apes, is one that's often cited as an argument in favor of the aquatic ape hypothesis. But again, here I think there's alternative explanations. What's your take on that? Do you find them to be compelling in favor of the aquatic ape hypothesis?
Well, actually, this is quite an interesting one, because in water you need an insulator, and fat is a very good insulator. However, I mean, the fur is just as efficient, like many polar bears and the like have high body fat percentage and fur. But why wouldn't humans?
Overheating?
Exactly. That's why we don't have any hair, which allows us to sweat more readily, which would cool us in a hot environment, while the fat would still insulate us in a water-based environment. Otherwise, there's no reason for the humans to be covered in fat. We just have hair, which is far more efficient if you're living on a savannah, or even a jungle.
Well, why would, maybe I'm misreading you here, but why would losing your hair be a favorable change to a more water-based lifestyle?
No, it's for the it's for the heat on the land that you lose your hair, because the body, if you have body fat and hair, you cannot use convection cooling. Humans are very, very good at cooling themselves quickly.
So you're basically saying that we lost our hair due to the changes of a more land-based lifestyle or moving out into the savannah, but we kept our body fat while losing our hair to still be viable in the rat race of survival in water-based areas.
Yeah.
Well, if that's a compelling argument, then why don't other apes who have habitats comparable to early humans lose their hair in similar ways?
Because they don't swim or go across open plains at all.
Well, now I might be wrong here, but I think you're contradicting yourself. Like your argument for why we lose our hair is overheating when we're out in the open, but then animals, and we keep our fat because we go into water-based environments, but other creatures, which other great apes who wouldn't go near water-based environments, wouldn't have an equal incentive for a large body fat percentage like we do but they would have an incentive for losing their hair. But that's the exact opposite of what you actually see happening.
No, because with the hair they're an insulator, which isn't a problem because they're not heavily water-based.
So why isn't overheating a problem for them then?
Because the hair insulates them, but they don't have to swim. You would lose temperature rather quickly if you just had hair in water.
I'm reaching the exact opposite conclusion that you are.
The hippopotamus is the same. It's nearly hairless and it sweats like a human being, but it has a high body fat percentage because it lives in water.
Yeah, I guess. I don't find it that compelling of an argument, though.
No, it's not necessarily true. I mean, I'm more than happy to say the hairlessness of humans is down to sexual dimorphism.
Well, that's kind of the problem I have with most of the points which are brought up in favor of the aquatic ape hypothesis. Is there, when you apply Occam's razor, there's at least comparably easy and logical explanations as to why those things are the way they are.
The other one I was thinking of is Vernix.
Go on.
Have you heard of Vernix?
Rings a vague bell, but you're going to have to explain it to me.
Vernix is a coating found on animals who are born semi-aquatic animals rather than having an amniotic sac.
Ah, yes, and it's noticed in human babies and not in other great apes.
Not in other great apes and not in a lot of mammals, but there are comparable similar animals which do, like seals have vernix when they're born. And after looking this up quite extensively, I had to find another common ancestor which does have a semi-aquatic one, which was pigs. And as they closely resemble human in many ways, I thought they'd be a good example. After reading straight through an entire veterinary code of practice, they also have a vernix coating on their piglets when they're born.
That's an interesting point, but I'm instantly questioning that because domesticated pigs, as we know them right now, are a relatively recent
Oh yeah,
species.
I looked at the originals. Yes, I did look at boars. Yes, I looked at boars. Boars do, of course, have hair, so that does sort of knock down the human idea. But boars originate from Eurasia and northern Africa. And they also have a high body fat percentage. Not as high as domesticated pigs, but they do have a high body fat percentage compared to many other animals.
So you see the vernix in domesticated piglets.
Yeah.
What about infant boars?
Unfortunately, I couldn't find any research on that. But they are semi-aquatic as well. I mean, they're more than happily live in swamps and marshes. And have an omnivore diet, which is comparable to a human being as well.
Even boars, because I know that's obviously the case with domesticated pigs, but I gotta admit I haven't researched for the purposes of this topic the changes in boars. That's certainly interesting, but I think to really make a definite decision on how well that argument supports the aquatic ape hypothesis would be what the ancestors of domesticated pigs have in that regard, because for all you know, it could be a recent genetic mutation.
It could be, but what's the one? Pigs are more closely related to dolphins than they are elephants. That's an interesting one.
I know that hippos are more closely related to ocean-based mammals like dolphins and whales than they are to most other land-based similar-looking mammals such as horses and pigs and cows. But I didn't know that about pigs.
Pigs and cows have a common ancestor as well.
Well,
but the vernix is not
ancestor,
found on
obviously.
cows, which I did look up.
Well, I haven't looked this all up, but I think there's. I'm instantly reminded of an interesting website which you can use to figure out the likely common ancestor between two animal species based on scientific research papers on the topic. It's called timetree.org, and it bases itself on nearly 100,000 species that you can compare based on more than 3,000 scientific studies. So yeah, we may have to look at that and then determine how closely they're related and how well that supports the aquatic ape hypothesis or disproves it. But yeah, that might be something for an addendum that we could edit in later, because yeah, it's an interesting website. I've played around with it before, and I think it would help us in this in determining the viability of our mammalian ancestors as related to this topic.
That there are many other circumstantial evidences I could give you, but you mentioned one of them already, which was the standing in water and water supports you wading idea, and I myself found that not entirely viable. But yeah, these are the three most viable ideas I could come up with from the theory, which I seem to make a relatively good argument. Vernix is probably the most provable one.
Okay, yeah, Vernix. That was a more recent discovery, because initially it was seen as an argument against the aquatic ape hypothesis, because supposedly it wasn't observed in ocean-based mammals, but it was more recent, at least after 2000, certainly, that it was observed in seals. It became an argument supporting it. So that is certainly something to consider based on more recent information. Another thing that I found, which was interesting, was development in bones in the skull based on around the ears, based on if you have a more aquatic lifestyle and you dive more often. Apparently, your bone structure near your ears can change if you spend more time around water and dive on a regular basis. And that's not found in many humans who don't have such a lifestyle, but it is observed in more ocean-based tribes and groups of people. It's not found in many other mammals, but early human fossils of Homo erectus, Homo habilis, it was observed in. So that was an interesting one, and I think more research is still needed, because it was kind of patchy and I couldn't find any actual proper citations for it. But if that turns out to be well supported, then I think the aquatic ape hypothesis has a strong argument in favor of it. And I think once more research on these topics surfaces over the coming while, this will be a topic to seriously be considered, at least for the coming few years or perhaps decades.
Yeah, do you have anything else you can think of?
Well, I did find an interesting study that was published last year in Nature in May of 2017, and it was an analysis culturally and genetically of an ethnic group which is mostly based in Indonesia, called the, hope I get the pronunciation right here, the Bajo people, or the Bajo people, B-A-J-O, which are one of the last few ethnic groups which maintain sea-based nomadic lifestyle, as in mostly being on boats for the majority of their lives, and yeah, never really venturing far inland, so mostly living on an ocean-based diet. And you may have seen the free divers of more ocean-based societies who can stay underwater for long periods of time and basically do underwater hunting, walking on the ocean floor.
Yeah, yes, I've heard of them.
And apparently, free diving and holding your breath for longer are things which most humans can learn easily.
Oh, and, that was something I looked up.
So yeah, apparently it's a reflex that if you get into contact with cold water, at least your head and your face, to gasp for air and basically hold your breath. That's observed in babies already, which is swimming while pregnant or swimming with a newborn baby is a popular thing, and they seem to have there seems to be a natural tendency in humans to learn that really easily, especially compared to other primates. And you see some ocean-based societies like in the Far East, around Indonesia was where the research was based on. And you see peoples who base their lifestyles around these talents. So the genetic analysis of these people mostly focused on changes in the last few thousand years, so the last few hundred generations or so. But it does open up the idea that perhaps these are things that we all have tendencies towards, but that these people using them in societies which have really begun to exist over the past few thousand years, maybe moving us more back to basics of our perhaps aquatic ape origins.
Yeah, well, on the argument of breathing, there's an interesting thing humans can do, which is partially due to the fact we can speak, which could explain it entirely, but other animals who are semi-aquatic can also do this, which is we can stop breathing. At any point,
Yes,
we can just hold our breath.
Yes, we can control our breathing, which is not that typical for most mammals. For a lot of species, it seems to be an involuntary action, like your heart rate is to us. But yeah, controlling our breathing, which enables diving on the one hand, and speaking on the other, that's another thing that seems to create a bit of a dichotomy, because the fact that our control of breathing compared to many other mammals which can't supports an aquatic ape hypothesis, and us having a more aquatic lifestyle and genetic tendencies towards that, which enables us to dive like dolphins or whales can control their breathing as well, obviously to a much greater extent than we can, but it's the same concept. But on the other hand, it's relatively easy to see how in more relatively recent times, talking tens or perhaps hundreds of thousands of years, how speech has provided us with a significant survival advantage as well. So it's one development that seems to provide arguments in favor of both the savanna and the aquatic ape hypothesis.
Well, there is an amendment to that, because inside of all mammals is the aquareflux capacity.
Meaning to hold your breath if you hit the water.
No, not only that, but if you put most mammals, there are a few exceptions, if you put most mammals underwater, not only will they try and hold their breath, obviously, but also your heart rate will cut in half.
Yes, I'd heard that as well.
That's why
It's
if you go diving,
mostly
you can...
concerns cold water, though.
Nope, still cuts in half whenever you're underwater. That's why you can hold your breath longer while swimming than you can just in air.
I had heard that, but I think it's more noticeable in colder water than it is in more moderately temperature ones.
If the water is cold enough, your body will go into shock and your heart rate will double.
I'm talking more like going to a European beach rather than a tropical one.
Right, have you got any more amendments or...
Well, let me look through my notes. No, I think I covered most of my notes. So I think we can move to our conclusion now. You seem to favor the hypothesis quite a bit more than I do. I don't outright oppose it.
Yeah, I would say I'm in favor of the idea. I mean, there are counter arguments to many of it, but I would say I'm still leaning in favor of the idea.
Yes, it is certainly an idea to be considered seriously, and I look forward to doing so.
If I can do this, I will do this. But click above and vote yes or no.
Yes, and if you have any interesting ideas or points we missed, then feel free to point them out. If there's something we did or said that you don't like, please feel free to point that out as well. But please remain constructive, and we hope to see you in the next one.
And please leave your insults in the comments below. I've been Gorilla.
I've been Dax.
And that has been the Aquatic Ape Theory.
Hypothesis.